For too long, infrastructure dollars have not been deployed equitably to Indian country. Tribal communities deal with crumbling roads and bridges, a lack of access to high-speed internet, and challenges getting safe and clean water and sanitation facilities. About 70% of the roads in the Bureau of Indian Affairs road system remain unpaved, and only 68% of bridges in the system are deemed to be, quote unquote, in acceptable condition. Less than half of the households living on tribal lands possess high-speed internet at home, and approximately 10% of tribal households lack access to adequate sanitation facilities or clean and safe water sources. The bipartisan infrastructure law makes transformative investments that will create generational impacts for tribal communities. The president wants to deliver opportunity and access to the future of our economy to all communities, and he believes that when Indian country thrives, all of America thrives. He also believes that in everything we do, we must respect tribal sovereignty and self-governance. That is why I have made it a priority to have meaningful and robust discussions with hundreds of tribal leaders through consultations on key infrastructure policies. To make sure we live up to the promise of building a better America, the bipartisan infrastructure law specifically includes provisions that set aside over $13 billion in funds and other resources for tribal communities. Behind what is set aside, tribes are also eligible to apply for billions of dollars in competitive programs. Together, this is going to be the largest investment in tribal infrastructure in American history. For Indian country, this means specifically, first, providing high-speed internet to every home and business, and second, making high-speed internet more affordable so that all communities stay connected to jobs, precision agriculture, telemedicine, and distance learning. It will ensure clean drinking water is available in all homes. It will make large investments in sanitation facilities, fundamentally changing the quality of life for approximately 71,000 American Indian and Alaskan Native homes lacking adequate sanitation facilities in their homes. It will provide resources for tribal transportation programs and increasing access to transit systems to connect Indian country to more economic opportunity. It will upgrade electric and transmission infrastructure to improve resilience, reliability, safety, affordability, and the availability of energy. And it will help building communities that are resilient to natural disasters like drought and wildfires, and preserving the lands, natural resources, and outdoor recreation opportunities vital to all Americans. More than 150 bipartisan infrastructure programs are open to the tribes. So today we released the bipartisan infrastructure law, Tribal Playbook, that highlights specific programs that are particularly relevant to the tribes. This playbook identifies programs and sources of funds specifically set aside for tribal communities under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And it identifies specific benefits or flexibilities for tribes and tribal communities, such as waivers for federal matching requirements. This playbook provides an overview of the what, the when, the where, and the how to apply for funds. You can find it online at build.gov, along with other technical assistance resources for the bipartisan infrastructure law. This month, as you know, we celebrated the 6-month anniversary of President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, and we have hit the ground running. To date, we have announced over $110 billion that is hitting communities this year, including many investments in Indian country. This includes $1.7 billion to fulfill Indian water rights settlements, $29 million for power, irrigation, and dam safety, tens of millions in drought and resilience and aging infrastructure, $46 million in funding to tribal communities to address the unique impacts of climate change in indigenous communities, and $83 million for high-speed internet on tribal lands. And you know what? We're just getting started. Today, you will hear from EPA and the Indian Health Service about more than $850 million that will be invested in fiscal year 2022 alone in water, wastewater, and sanitation projects. And we'll talk about the deep coordination happening across the federal government to make sure that these funds get deployed on time and on budget. One of the president's tasks to me is to make sure that no community is left behind in this once-in-a-generation investment. We talk about our administration's commitment to building a better America that must include Indian country. So now let me turn it over to my partner, Radhika Fox, the Assistant Administrator for Water at the Environmental Protection Agency, for more on how the bipartisan infrastructure law will deliver new resources and better coordination on water, wastewater, and sanitation for the tribes. Radhika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mitch, and thank you for the incredible leadership that you are bringing to bear as we implement the bipartisan infrastructure law. And good afternoon, everybody. As Mitch mentioned, President Biden has a deep commitment to strengthening the nation-to-nation relationship with tribes. This was a core commitment that he made when he was on the campaign trail, and he's been following through on that now that he is our president. And what we've been doing at EPA is using every tool in our toolbox to deliver on that commitment. That's why last fall, the EPA issued the first ever Tribal Water Action Plan, and it outlined a series of commitments that the EPA was making to strengthen our partnership with tribes and Alaska Native villages on a range of water issues. We felt that it was critically important to do that because we know that if you are a tribal member, if you live in an Alaska Native village, you are less likely to have a flushing toilet. You are less likely to be able to turn on the tap and ensure that clean drinking water is coming out. And we really wanted to change that. Our Tribal Water Action Plan includes a range of commitments that we are making to Indian country, including robust coordination and meaningful consultation, strengthening and expanding water governance, honoring our federal trust responsibility and protecting tribal reserved rights related to water resources, and finally, increasing infrastructure funding and capacity development. And because of President Biden's vision and leadership and bipartisan congressional action, we're going to be able to supercharge that commitment to increasing infrastructure funding and capacity development. So we're just thrilled today to be joining the White House and our federal partners to announce 3 key actions that EPA is taking. One is earlier today, we issued an implementation memo to guide the investment of about $868 million dedicated to tribal water infrastructure through the state revolving loan fund program. $154 million of that will be going to tribal communities in 2022 alone. The implementation memo really directs states, regions, and tribal communities, tribal nations all around the country in how to access these funds. And there's incredible flexibility that tribes will have in utilizing these dollars, whether it's for drinking water challenges, wastewater challenges, getting lead out of water systems, addressing PFAS and other emerging contaminants. So it's an incredible opportunity, historic opportunity. Second, we're also announcing today $2.6 million dedicated to addressing emerging contaminants for tribal nations. We will be implementing these resources in partnership with the Indian Health Service. And these dollars are dedicated to those tribal households that don't have drinking water or wastewater services to begin with, or to tribal water systems with a violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So an incredible opportunity there. And finally, we are committed to partnering for progress in tribal nations all across the country. And that's why today the federal family has come together to announce the renewal of a tribal infrastructure task force. So this was a task force that the federal family put together in 2007, and it really stemmed from our commitment that the United States made to support the United Nations Millennial Development Goal on access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. A number of folks on the call may not even know what this Tribal Infrastructure Task Force was, but it has been an absolutely fantastic mechanism to improve federal government coordination to deliver water infrastructure and financial assistance to tribes and Alaska Native villages. And we felt that, now more than ever, we need to double down on this Tribal Infrastructure Task Force. So I'm just honored that EPA is joining with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Interior, and Health and Human Services in renewing this commitment, renewing this task force. At EPA, we know that safe water is essential to everybody, no matter the color of your skin, your address, or how much money you make. And with these historic investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're going to be able to deliver for communities around the country, especially to tribes, Alaska Native villages, and other communities across Indian country. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Secretary Andrea at Health and Human Services.
Thank you so much, Assistant Administrator Fox. It's great to be with you today as well. With you, Mitch, thank you so much for hosting us to make these announcements together. I'm really, again, happy to be here on behalf of Secretary Becerra to discuss the bipartisan infrastructure law and how it will really help tribal communities from the HHS perspective. In the past year, I really have been fortunate to be here at HHS to witness the progress that we have made at HHS in partnership with the tribes. From upholding the administration's commitment to honoring tribal sovereignty, to distributing more than $9 billion to support COVID-19 mitigation in Indian country through our Indian Health Service, nearly $6 billion of which was provided through the American Rescue Plan, to successfully distributing and administering COVID-19 vaccines throughout Indian country. It's been a real source of pride for us here at HHS to see the good progress that we've made to live up to the President's pledge to support tribal communities. Despite this progress, there's plenty of unfinished work that we need to do to live up to our obligations to Indian country. A 2015 IHS study found that nearly 1 in 10 tribal households lacked safe drinking water supplies and adequate waste disposal facilities, compared to less than 1% of all homes across this country. At the end of fiscal 2021, IHS has identified approximately $3.4 billion worth of eligible water and sewer needs across roughly 1,500 projects in Indian country. For these reasons, the bipartisan infrastructure law is a tremendous boost to our work to promote public health and prevent the spread of disease. Specifically, the bipartisan infrastructure law appropriates $700 million to the Indian Health Service each and every year between 2022 and 2026, and that's a total of $3.5 billion, to build infrastructure to ensure a safe supply of drinking water, reliable sewage systems, and solid waste disposal facilities. And the funding will address the backlog of projects on IHS's Sanitation Deficiency System list, which is a prioritized inventory of known sanitation issues for tribal households. This means that many tribal communities will no longer have to put up with bursting pipes, water shutoffs, boil water notices, and as a result, again, will reap the public health benefits that come with this work. Decisions on the allocation of fiscal year 22 funds are being shared today with recipient communities through a letter to tribal leaders. Today, as we announce this transformational funding, IHS leadership is on the ground in Alaska to see firsthand some of the projects that the bipartisan infrastructure law will benefit. This funding will provide Alaska Native homes with critical services like water wells, on-site wastewater disposal systems, or connections to community water supplies. Funding tribal communities, meeting our nation-to-nation obligations, and working together to improve the health and well-being of Indian country continues to be a priority of the Biden-Harris administration. Thank you again for allowing me to take part in today's press call. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Interior Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, Bryan Newland.
Great. Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be with you all today. My name is Bryan Newland. I'm the Assistant Secretary for the Department of the Interior for Indian Affairs. And it's great to be here with Mayor Landrieu, Ambassador Rice, and others as we share more about our multi-agency work to put critical investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law into the hands of tribal communities. As Mitch mentioned, through President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, we're making record investments in tribal communities. In total, this funding represents the single largest investment in tribal infrastructure ever in the history of this country, with more than $13 billion to expand access to high-speed internet, improve roads and bridges, and to take action to combat the climate crisis that threatens too many tribal communities. Those tribal communities have too often been left behind and not given a seat at the table to be part of decisions that impact them and their communities, including project development and funding opportunities. That's why, as we began to implement this historic law, our work started with soliciting tribal feedback. At the department, we began this process with government-to-government consultations with tribes to ensure that we had the benefit of hearing directly from those communities. I've had the pleasure to travel with Secretary Holland to hold listening sessions and hear from folks all across Indian country to better understand their concerns, their barriers, and how these dollars can best serve them. And we heard Indian country loud and clear about the need for more information about available funding, capacity building, technical assistance, and speeding up the permitting process. With the Tribal Playbook, we're putting additional tools into the hands of tribal communities so that we can ensure these funds meet existing challenges and have long-lasting impacts for the communities they serve. Funding allocated to the Department of the Interior from the infrastructure law is focused on a few key areas, and we've been hard at work to get these dollars out the door as quickly as we can. We're expanding access to water by repairing aging dams, spillways, and water sanitation systems. We've invested over $420 million already in drought resilience and tribal water infrastructure. We're making a historic investment to help fulfill pre-existing settlements of Indian water rights claims. Already, we've invested $1.7 billion toward that end. This investment in Indian country, while long overdue, is unprecedented. We're supporting irrigation and power on reservations with more than $10 million invested in this fiscal year. And we're bolstering community climate resilience through a $216 million investment. I was recently in South Dakota at the Oglala Dam on the Pine Ridge Reservation, where we're making a $29 million investment that is long overdue to improve safety and revitalize communities. I was also in Washington State at the Yakima Reservation, where we announced $3.7 million in upgrades to the Wapato Irrigation Project, which is the largest irrigation project in the BIA system and supports more than $500 million in agricultural products every year. We're creating an infrastructure law interagency coordinating position here within Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior so that we can help Indian country navigate these resources. And we've issued a national policy memo directing the Bureau of Indian Affairs to prioritize permitting for any infrastructure projects so that these critical dollars can reach Indian country as quickly as possible. These are just some of the examples of how the infrastructure law is having a profound and positive impact on the lives of families and tribal communities across the country by safeguarding local water supplies, promoting local climate adaptation efforts, and supporting tribal self-governance. The bipartisan infrastructure law and this administration represent a unique opportunity to create lasting and meaningful improvements for Native communities, and I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of this work.